You're currently listening to or watching Prophetic News in Focus.
Israeli officials were enraged by the passing of the UNESCO resolution put forth by the Palestinians, denying all historical connection between Jews and Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. The document called Israel the occupying force many times. Jordan and the Palestinian Authority submitted the resolution. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated, "To say the Jews have no connection to the Western Wall is like saying the Chinese have no connection to the Great Wall or the Egyptians have no connection to the pyramids." Israel and the U.S. worked for the last few months to prevent the vote, but were unsuccessful. There were 26 abstentions, 24 supported, and 6, including the U.S., who voted against the resolution. President Reuven Rivlin stated, "No organization in the world can say there is no connection between Jews and Jerusalem. Any such body that does so simply embarrasses itself." On Thursday, there was an important meeting between the chief rabbis of Israel and top religious leaders from the Palestinian Authority in the president's residence in Jerusalem. They released a united call to stop the violence and harm of innocent civilians. This meeting included the highest levels of religious leaders of the two sides ever convened. The Israeli State Attorney's Office submitted an indictment on Thursday against 3 Israeli Arab residents of Taibe, accusing them of various state security offenses, including joining ISIS and smuggling weapons. They are also accused of conspiring to dig a tunnel from northeast Taibe to the West Bank under the separation barrier. Yet another controversy broke out between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Education Minister Naftali Bennett, head of the Beit HaYehudi party. This time it was regarding the Amona settlement in the West Bank. The state has decided to turn to the Supreme Court to request a 6-month delay in evacuating the settlement. This followed a meeting between Netanyahu and Bennett. The Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and Attorney General were surprised to hear Bennett's briefing to the press on Thursday when he stated that the decision to appeal to the Supreme Court derived from pressure by the Beit HaYehudi party. The decision had been made days earlier. Once again, Bennett takes credit for a decision that had already been made, stated an Israeli government official. 2 Israeli border policemen were injured on Thursday when a driver ran through the Azaim checkpoint near Jerusalem. The driver attempted to flee the scene, but Israeli security forces apprehended him. It was initially believed that this incident was a terror attack. However, after the driver was interrogated at the scene, it was determined that the act was criminal, as the driver had stolen the car. Israeli Foreign Affairs Ministry Director General Dr. Dori Gold announced his resignation on Thursday, citing personal reasons for leaving. Gold informed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is also the Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister, about his decision. Gold has been serving as Director General since June 2015 and has been working with Netanyahu for 25 years. It was reported that the resignation may stem from a conflict between Gold and Netanyahu. Gold felt that he had not been included in major sensitive decisions regarding Israeli policies.
And he never apologized for the racist lie that President Obama was not born in the United States of America. He owes the president an apology.
Well, you owe the president an apology because, as you know, you're the one that sent the pictures around your campaign with President Obama in a certain garb. That was long before I was ever involved, so you actually owe an apology. And number 2, Michelle Obama. I've gotten to see some of the most vicious commercials I've ever seen of Michelle Obama talking about you, Hillary.
Is that if you can't run your own house, you certainly can't run the White House.
A race where you lost, fair and square, unlike the Bernie Sanders race where you won, but not fair and square, in my opinion. And all you have to do is take a look at WikiLeaks and just see what they said about Bernie Sanders and see what Deborah Wasserman Schultz had in mind. Because Bernie Sanders, between superdelegates and Deborah Wasserman Schultz, he never had a chance. And I was so surprised to see him sign on with the devil.
Evan, hold on. Can you fact check that? Hang on, Evan Perez.
Devil?
Fact check that for me, please, on the fly.
Yes.
But when you talk about apology, I think the one that you should really be apologizing for, and the thing that you should be apologizing for, are the 33,000 emails that you deleted. If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation. And we're going to look into it because you know what? People have been, their lives have been destroyed for doing 1/5 of what you've done. And it's a disgrace. And honestly, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised. Really? In the first debate, go to HillaryClinton.com. We have literally Trump. You can fact check him in real time. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
We want to remind the audience to please not talk out loud. Please do not.
This is AP News Minute. 2 Boston police officers are in extremely critical condition after being gunned down by a man wearing body armor and armed with an assault rifle. Fellow officers dragged the wounded officers out of the line of fire and eventually shot and killed the gunman. U.S. launched Tomahawk cruise missiles destroyed 3 radar sites on Yemen's Red Sea coast early Thursday. It was a retaliatory action that followed 2 incidents this week in which missiles were fired at U.S. Navy ships. Thailand's royal palace says the world's longest reigning monarch has died at age 88. Bhumibol Adulyadej became king in 1946 and was revered in Thailand as a demigod.
The Yemeni army has warned that any further U.S. attacks against the country will be met with countermeasures. This comes after the Pentagon confirmed hitting Yemeni radar sites with cruise missiles. Army slammed the strikes and said that Sana'a has a right to defend itself in the face of threats. Yemeni forces say that they've downed a Saudi drone in the kingdom's Jizan region. Yemenis also killed a Saudi guard in a border region inside the kingdom. Ansarullah fighters and allied army units say that their attacks come in response to Riyadh's ongoing onslaught on their country. Iraq summons the Turkish ambassador to give the envoy a strongly worded note of protest over Ankara's military deployment in the north of the Arab country. Turkey has shrugged off Baghdad's repeated calls to withdraw its troops. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has warned the Iraqi Prime Minister to know his limits. The Syrian army has liberated the town of Man in western province of Hama from militant groups. This comes a day after government forces killed more than 70 Takfiri terrorists in Hama. Syrian troops have inflicted heavy losses on militants in Aleppo, Daraa, Latakia, and elsewhere in recent months. Russia's foreign ministry has warned against supplying anti-aircraft missiles to terrorist groups in Syria. Kremlin said any anti-Russia stance will draw an appropriate response from Moscow. Reports say some regional countries may arm terrorists with ground-to-surface missiles. Takfiri terrorists in Syria have already confirmed receiving Grad missiles from foreign backers. The Scottish First Minister is set to publish a bill which will pave the way for a new independence referendum in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon also threatened to vote against the Brexit bill next year. She accused London of xenophobia in its approach to Britain's exit from the European Union. The French president calls for a roadmap to resolve the Ukraine crisis. François Hollande, speaking during a phone conversation with Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko, he said that Ukraine should gain control over its borders with Russia. Violence continues in eastern Ukraine despite a ceasefire between Kiev and pro-Russia militias. The United Nations General Assembly has unanimously appointed former Portuguese Premier Antonio Guterres as the UN's new Secretary General. Guterres will be the 9th UN chief for a 5-year term and will replace Ban Ki-moon from January 1st.
Damascus area where the Russian embassy is situated has been shelled from mortars from the Jobar region, which is controlled by extremists. One of the bombs exploded in the immediate vicinity of the outer guard post of the diplomatic mission, another not far from the consular department entrance. 2 projectiles detonated 100 meters off the embassy gates, the foreign ministry reported. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, none of the Russian employees got injured as a result of shelling of the diplomatic mission. One One bomb was also dropped onto the roof of a school building which is situated not far from the embassy. Fortunately, it did not explode. The Foreign Ministry believes that the incident will be duly estimated by those who reject terrorism and do not share the inviolability of diplomatic missions. They also added in the ministry that consecutive Russia's policy on uncompromising fight against terrorists in Syria will be continued.
In the Hama province, the Syrian army's Tiger forces and its allies have been continuing operations against the joint terrorist forces. Intense clashes are ongoing at the Tel Buzam front. Russian and Syrian warplanes are pounding terrorist units near Ma'an, Suran and Tal al-Sawan as a pretext for further offenses by the government forces. The High Command of the Syrian Arab Army and militant groups started negotiations on allowing the militant groups' members a free passage from the eastern Aleppo pocket. In case of success, the army will set control of Bustan al-Qaisin neighborhood. Nonetheless, Jabhat al-Nusra and Nur Eddin al-Zinki, that are the main striking forces of the Jaish al-Fatah operation room in Aleppo, refused to negotiate with the government. Over 600 militants have handed over their heavy weapons and military equipment to the Syrian army in the Damascus countryside. About 200 militants and their families will be evacuated from Al-Hama and Qudisa, while others will use an opportunity to get a pardon from the government. Then the government forces will set full control of Al-Hama and Qudisa. The US and Saudi Arabia have agreed to grant free passage to over 9,000 Islamic State terrorists before the Iraqi city of Mosul is stormed. The jihadists will be redeployed to fight against the government in Syria, the media reported, citing various military and diplomatic sources that will allow them to carry out operations against the government-controlled cities of Deir ez-Zor and Palmyra. Saudi Arabia's General Intelligence Directorate will be the mediator and guarantor of the agreement. US President Barack Obama has allegedly sanctioned an operation to liberate Mosul due to take place in October. Redeployment of 9,000 ISIS fighters from Mosul will allow Washington the widely needed PR success in the fight against terrorism in Iraq to balance the de facto support of terrorist factions, including Al-Qaeda-linked Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. Meanwhile, the first photos, which allegedly depict the Russian heavy aircraft carrying cruiser Admiral Kuznetsov on the way to Syria's shores, have appeared in social media outlets. Initial reports suggested that the warship is set to depart to the Syrian coast to take part in the ongoing anti-terrorist operation in the period from October 15th to October 20th.
The US military has shelled a radar system in Yemen in response to shelling of the US destroyer in the Red Sea. The US ship Mason has been a target of 2 missile strikes at a time for the latest days. However, the missiles fell into the sea, not reaching the ship. According to the Pentagon, 2 missiles fell near the Mason destroyer and the Ponce vessel, which escorted it from the territory controlled by Houthis. Warship, which has been on alert in the northern part of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, also carried out some salvos from defensive weapons. Both US ships were not damaged. The crew was not injured either. However, the Pentagon authorities decided to respond in a proper manner. Before that, the Iranian military intercepted the US Nizam missile destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz. At the time, the military of Iran approached the destroyer at a distance less than 275 meters, despite warnings from the American military.
But at least one statement by Donald Trump sent reporters into a tailspin. If elected, he would assign a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary Clinton. Are these kinds of claims made by third world dictators, or is this something that should have happened already? Let's give it a reality check.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Well, there it was, the moment when Republican candidate for president Donald Trump said to the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton that if he is elected president, he would assign a special prosecutor to investigate her use of a private email server and the destruction of emails after a congressional subpoena. The response from the Clinton campaign and much of the media that this is the kind of thing that happens in the Banana Republic, not in the USA. So what leaders have actually done this? Well, to name just a few, former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, who jailed his opponent after Egypt's first contested election and had his opponent sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. How about Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe? he had an opposition leader arrested and reportedly tortured. And this year, Cambodia's prime minister had his main opposition leader arrested and sentenced to 5 months in jail before elections could even take place. So is there a difference between what Trump is claiming and what's happened in these countries? Well, yes, because first of all, under President Obama's administration, Clinton was already the subject of an FBI investigation. FBI Director James Comey said that charges were not recommended against Clinton, but that she was extremely careless in her handling of classified information. So the big question, why not leave the investigation there? Is there any legitimate reason or precedent for a special prosecutor? Well, yeah, back in 2003, a top presidential appointee by the name of Scooter Libby, he was investigated for mishandling classified information. A special prosecutor was assigned to the case, which was over the leak of a CIA agent Valerie Plame's name. Libby was charged by that special prosecutor and then convicted by a jury. More famously, in 1973, a special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, was named to investigate the Nixon administration's role in Watergate. It was Cox who tried to force Nixon to turn over the Watergate tape recordings. Nixon tried to use his attorney general to fire Cox, but the AG refused, and ultimately Nixon would fire them both before resigning his office. So what you need to know, today WikiLeaks released new hacked emails from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. And in that batch, an email from May of 2015. Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Fallon said that DOJ folks had informed him about an upcoming status conference in one of the lawsuits regarding Clinton's private email setup. That means the Department of Justice was in fact updating the Clinton campaign on the investigation. Plus, you have Bill Clinton meeting with Loretta Lynch 2 days before the FBI director announced the charges would not be filed, and the immunity given by the Justice Department to key players. All of it should make the public completely untrusting of this process. But at the same time, we should all be nervous about the idea of any president ordering an investigation into one of their rivals, regardless of the party. The bottom line, Donald Trump, if he becomes president, should not be the one appointing a prosecutor to investigate a political rival. But yes, assigning a special prosecutor to this case, that should have already happened.
American officials say the U.S. has destroyed 3 radar sites off the coast of Yemen. The strikes follow 2 incidents this week in which missiles were fired at U.S. Navy ships. President Obama authorized the launch of the Tomahawk cruise missiles to destroy the sites. Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook said the strikes were conducted in self-defense.